All right, I'm gonna start assembling this engine today. So it's been apart for a little while, but I didn't really get any of this cleaned out. So I always go through and spray brake cleaner in all the holes here, and then I blow it out with the air blower. And I just put a rag on top, clean out all the holes because you don't want any oil or anything in these holes when you're trying to tighten these down, because then you're going to put excess pressure on the bolt and on the head, and you're not going to get a proper torque reading. And not to mention, you can damage a lot of stuff doing that as well. So we blew all the holes out, blew the oil holes out too that go out to the VTEC solenoid. There was a little debris inside here that came out, and I assume that's probably from the block being redone. So that came out. And then I went ahead and cleaned up all the caps here, where the cap seal goes and then the distributor goes, and then along all the edges as well here, and then also here. Obviously, we're not going to install the valve cover or anything today, but we are going to put the cams in, cam caps on, oil rails, timing belt, all that sort of stuff. I went through and checked the tensioner pulley. So if your pulley has resistance on it, this is one thing that people need to check. If your pulley has resistance on it, see how this kind of just stops after, you know, spinning for just a little bit. If this has resistance on it, the bearing is still good. You can reuse that, or you can, you know, whatever you want to do. But if your pulley just sits there and spins and makes some noise, you definitely want to replace that. Do not use it if it's spinning freely and making noise, because then it's just gonna, it's just worn out. So don't do that. So I'm gonna put all this stuff on. I'm gonna go through some detail on how I put some of this stuff on, as far as like the spacers and all that sort of stuff, to make sure that I can try to help people put these belts on and go through some of those steps as well. I'm going to clean these cam caps up. So I already went through and Scotch brighted most of the surface areas and got the things cleaned up. So I'm just going to go through and get all the gunk out of all the holes and get all the bolts cleaned up and all that. So I'm just soaking it in gas. If you've never done that, it works pretty well. Just make a little parts washer bin here, and then I'll just use like a little brush like this and like this to get inside the holes, and we'll get all that stuff cleaned up before I start getting everything laid out on the motor, or for the motor. I will be replacing some of these bolts as well. I think one or two of them were sort of damaged, or they might have been stretched a little bit. They felt a little funky going in when I was assembling it one of the other times, or disassembling it. So I have new bolts for those, and I'm going to be using those. So get all this cleaned up, and then we'll get it all laid out and get it. All right, got everything out of the gas, cleaned up, and everything is looking pretty good. So I always recommend cleaning everything really well, because then you can see exactly what you're working with, especially on the bolts, because if they're all dirty and they're hard to see, you know, what's actually going on there, that just is going to make it worse for you. So sort of like this right here, like this is damaged. It's really hard to focus, but this is kind of damaged right here on this thread. So we're going to replace one of these, which I do have one of these as well, brand new. And I believe there's another one in here that had some damage. But anyways, we're going to go through and replace any of them that are. I think that one might be. So either way, we'll replace those, get all this stuff together. And then also, when I get this out of the gas, I always make sure and blow all these holes out really well. So all these holes are what feeds these holes for the oil rails in the VTEC. And then all these holes that are in here, this little hole right there, right there, right there, right there. All this stuff, once you get it cleaned up, you need to run some compressed air through these holes and make sure there is nothing in there that's blocking them or impeding any type of oil flow. That's very crucial to the VTEC process here. So make sure and get all that stuff cleaned out, blow all these holes out. Make sure when it comes out the bottom here, because that's where it feeds the oil. So make sure and blow all those holes out. as well. We did get a new cam cap seal, so we're going to put this Velcro cam cap seal in. Of course, put some Honda Bond on there. And all right, so first few steps, getting this put back together, went ahead and got some assembly lube. I use this right here, the Lucas assembly lube. You can use pretty much whatever you want, but I'm going to put that on there because I don't know how long this is going to sit before someone uses it. But we have the new cap installed with Honda Bond on it. When you put these in, you always want to make sure and push it flush up against the block or the head right here on both sides. Obviously the cap isn't on there yet, so got that set in there. Got the cam seals set in there. I like to push them all the way up against the edges there, and then just like make sure they're, you know, flush straight up and down. And I always make sure and try to push them all the way up against the head, sort of like that. So that way I know that they're straight up and down when I put the cap on it, and they're not crooked or something like that that can cause it to leak. They don't have to be all the way up against this piece right here. And in fact, sometimes they do slide when you have to move the cams when you put these caps on, but that's how I do it. And then that way I know that they're straight up and down. And then, so now that we have the cams in, the assembly lube on, we'll go ahead and put some assembly lube on the bottom of these. I've already cleaned the ends for where the cam seals go, and then also the end of here for where the cam cap goes. And this one doesn't really need cleaned because it's the distributor. So we'll get some assembly lube on there, get those on, get the oil rails on, and then get ready to do the timing belt and all that stuff. All right, so next step in the process, we have the caps on and seated pretty good. You want to start with this cap and this cap first because those are actually what align the cams in the journals. So if you set these first and then get them seated a little bit, then everything else will be in the proper location, including where you want to keep the cam seals and all that. When you're putting this together, these only go together one way because obviously these have 2 bolt holes in it. This has 1 bolt each in it, and these also have these dowels in the ends down here, and they only fit in that section. So you can't flip these around. And if you have these caps right here backwards, then obviously this is not going to fit. And then also it does have arrows here as well that all point the same direction, that it should be pointing that way. And that's how you know, obviously, everything is set in the proper location. Once you have that done, go ahead and pop the bolts in and get everything seated down the rest of the way. I forgot to mention, since we did clean these holes out down here with brake cleaner and we cleaned these off with gasoline, when you look at these bolts, you can tell that they're very, very dry. You don't want to install any bolts completely dry, but again, you don't need to use assembly lube on bolts either. So I'm just going to use, I just poured some O'Reilly's motor oil in this little cap right here, and then I'm going to dip my finger in there, coat this very, very lightly, because again, you don't want to put too much on there. You don't need it dripping or anything like that. You just want a thin little coat on here, so that way when you put them in, it's not dry on dry, because once that happens and you get a bunch of heat cycles, getting these out is probably going to be very difficult. Not to mention, if you're installing anything and you hear it creak, that means that it is dry and that you need to have some sort of lubricant on there, because that's not only going to damage this when you try to pull it back out, it could cause it to get seized in there, and also it's going to throw off your torque rating as well too. So go ahead and put a little bit of motor oil on this, on all these bolts that you're going to put in, very lightly, and then all right, so we got all those in there, not tight yet, but just set in there. One thing I wanted to mention was that when you're running all these bolts down, you want to make sure that they go all the way down with your just hand. You don't want to have to fight any of these bolts. So if these bolts are not able to go all the way down just by your hand, then you really need to figure out what's going on there, whether the threads are messed up or the bolt is messed up or something like that, all of these should be able to be ran down all the way almost flush with your fingers. If you can't do that, then back it off, clean out the hole, figure out what's going on. Don't force it if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel like you're just barely, threading that in all the way down to the bottom where it meets the rail, then you need to figure out what's going on because something is not right. I wanted to mention that you don't want to run these caps down with the tins. Leave the tins for the very last. The torque sequence needs to be through the actual rail itself. So you always want to start from the middle, work your way out on all the 12s, get those tight, and then tighten down the tins. I've seen a lot of people break these tins off, or the cap is not aligned and they strip out the holes or something like that. So you want to make sure and get the rails down tight with the 12s, torque all that stuff down. Then you want to do the tins on the torque spec on those and get those taken care of. You don't want to go the opposite direction and end up breaking one of these tins in there because they're really long and they break very easily. So just keep that in mind when you're putting this together. One thing I noticed when I was putting this together, the reason why we pulled this out is just because the swap was done really poorly and I didn't like how it looked. And when I was doing this, I noticed that this cam actually had the right bolt in it that has this big washer on here, which is the right bolt that you should have on there. And the other one had this bolt in there, which is a 14 with a washer, but this is not a cam bolt. So went ahead and took those off, cleaned those up a little bit, and then I'm gonna get a cam bolt for this and replace it so that way everything matches the correct way and puts the right amount of pressure on the cam, because you do not want these coming loose for any reason. Both cams on with the right cam bolts set up to top dead center, close enough. You want to have this line right here with this edge of the head right here, these two matching, as close as possible, and then this edge, this line right here with the edge of this head, and then you're good on those. All right, so I got the gear on there. Obviously it's got the keyway in it. You always want to make sure that this is pretty free moving. You don't want this stuck on there because they do get stuck. So make sure that that's kind of free moving. Make sure that the the keyway stays inside there, which it is. Run this down, and then we're going to turn this counterclockwise until we get the line with a little arrow wherever it's at on here, right to that little mark right there. And then we'll have the bottom set to top dead center, and then we can get ready to put on the belt. Turn it counterclockwise, and we've got it set to top dead center. This line right here is going to be in line with that arrow right there. So that's how if you have this cover off and all that and you're setting it, that's how you do it right there. This line with that arrow. And then now that this is set, we'll go ahead and get ready to do the belt. It's pretty straightforward. I'll try to show as much as I can, but it's kind of hard to do this with only one motor exposed like this. Obviously, it's going to be a lot easier to put the belt on because you can see exactly what you're doing. You're not working at any funky angles. So basically this really just slid right on. So what I do is I loop it through the bottom first, obviously, loop it over the tensioner around the water pump. I put this edge on right here. So I leave this belt off about halfway, so it'll be sticking out about this far. So it's barely on the edge of this cam right here. Then I'll take this side and then slip it up, kind of rotating it this way and pulling it up at the same time, and then slipping it onto the teeth. Then once it's on the teeth, go ahead and just, straighten it up, kind of get it centered in the cams there. It will adjust if it needs to, obviously, but that's how it's going to be on there for now. I still need to go through and tighten or, do the tensioner and all that. So how I do that, obviously it does have a little bit of tension already because it is the correct belt. This is a GSR, or this is a b18c1 belt, and this is a 19 tooth water pump. So if you have a 19 tooth, that's going to be a b18b1. If you have a 22 tooth, that's going to be a GSR. So obviously this motor had a 19 tooth on it, so we mated it up with a b18b1 belt, and that's how we got the correct length there. So just keep that in mind. You can mix and match them. You don't have to use a LS water pump on an LS. You don't have to use a GSR on a GSR. All of them will bolt up to the B series, and you can interchange the belts as well, but it has to match this pump. So whatever pump you are using, that is the belt that you are stuck with. Do not try to mix and match the belts with pumps, because it won't work. You can't, so we'll just leave it at that. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and turn this. I'm gonna turn this about 2 to 3 teeth up here. From the crank down here, I'm gonna turn it 2 to 3 teeth, and then I'm gonna tighten up the 12 here. And then after that, that should be all you need to do if everything is correct. You don't have to get these extremely tight. If you do, they do whine and they make noise. And eventually you can snap belts, especially if you have an old belt and you over tighten it by pulling on this tensioner right here to get the belt tighter. If you're putting too much stress on an old belt, it will break. So just keep that in mind. Turn it a couple teeth, get it nice and tight, tighten the tensioner. That should be all you need, and I'll show you what that looks like. I went ahead and turned it a couple teeth. So when you turn it a few teeth, you're gonna, basically count how many go by each other right here. Normally I go 3, 4, 5, whatever. Doesn't really matter. There's no exact science on that, I don't think. But you will feel it get really tight down here when you're pushing on it, and you want it to stay tight while you're actually turning it. And this belt will be nice and tight when you're doing that. So when you turn it 4 or 5 teeth, it will be pretty hard to turn the crank. And then don't go past that. So if you go past that, you'll have to do it again. So turn it 4 or 5 teeth. It should stay very tight on the crank, and then go ahead and tighten up the 14 here. So I went ahead and did that, and then I turned it all the way back around to top dead center. So we are lined up with the edge of the head here, the cams here, edge of the head here, and then down here you can see that this mark is still lined up with that. Don't get super, anal retentive on this, because if you get a ruler out and you go against this and you look at that and you're like, oh my God, it's not a dead match. Well, it's not ever gonna be. It's not gonna be a perfect match between that and that. This is just a reference point. As long as this arrow right here isn't on this one or something like that, it can be a little off, and it's very hard to tell because I'm not directly on, but you can see that's very close. But sometimes it will be a little off. As long as this mark is very close to that, you're gonna be fine. As long as it's not over here on this one or over here on this one when you turn the whole deal to check it. But since I've already done it, what I normally do is I crank it a few times, and I let the motor kind of spin over. And once you see it, once you feel it get loose again, as far as like when it loses compression, so right there, it's pretty easy to turn. I check the belt. I mean, you can see that belt is nice and tight. It's almost too tight, but that's just how it is from just normally tensioning it. So we'll spin it again, and we'll make sure that everything stays on there. So you can see also here, it's actually kind of starting to walk off of this bottom gear, and that's because we don't have that ring on here as well. Once I get that ring on there, everything will make sure and stay nice and in line. But you can see at any point in time, this belt doesn't have any crazy slack in it. That's a good belt. So we'll go ahead and spin this around all the way again, top dead center. I'll put the washer on, and we'll get this finished out. The little spacer washer, it's actually what holds on the belt. So there is a beveled edge to it. So the beveled edge that's tapered out this way, you'll see that it does have a taper on one side. That side goes towards the belt. Judging by this, how much material is either on here, it looks like someone actually had this on backwards before and the belt was rubbing on this really bad, or that's plastic from the cover. I can't really tell either way, but this side, the tapered side, this side always goes towards the belt like this, so that way the belt doesn't have a chance of rubbing up against the sharp edge on this side, and that's what keeps that aligned right there. Then we'll put the pulley on. So we'll put another keyway in, we'll put the pulley on, well actually we'll put the cover on, and then we'll put the keyway in, pulley on. You want to put this on before you put the cover on, because a lot of times if you put the cover on first and this hole right here is in really good condition, it's almost impossible to get this washer on here. So do the washer first, then do the cover, then do the keyway and the crank pulley itself. Right. Got the cover cleaned up here a little bit. Got a new keyway to fit down here for the crank pulley itself. Pop that right in there, yep, just like that. Gonna sit pretty flush. So I did want to mention that on these covers, we do have some of these for sale. This one obviously is not the best, but having a cover in any type of condition that's going to cover your timing belt is better than none at all, which I see that happen a lot. Also, you will need these bolts. We do have more of these bolts as well for sale if you do need bolts. We have cam gears, we have mounts, 2-post and 3-post mounts, things like that. Yeah, so if you guys need stuff like that, definitely let me know and we can get those out to you. And I'm going to put this on. I'm going to tighten it down, but I'm not going to put it on all the way because I don't know what we're going to do here. Some people need a 3-post, some people need a 2-post, and in order to do that, you have to pull the cover back off to get to that lower bolt right there. So we're going to leave that mount off and then go ahead and put the other stuff on, just kind of put on but not tight, and then basically this whole thing will be ready to go. I also wanted to mention on here real quick that this is a OBD2 pump, so you have to use an OBD2 outer piece here. Lost my train of thought. So you have to use a cover from an OBD2 if you're using an OBD2 pump, and that's because it has the provisions for the crank sensor itself. I'm not going to install a crank sensor on this, but it does have obviously the gear for it. So some people buy these and they're like, oh, I'm going to put it in a car, but I'm going to convert it to OBD1 anyways, so you don't need a crank sensor at all. But they have the ability to put one on if they need to, because this is the correct pump for it and the correct cover and all that sort of stuff. So if you're buying a motor from me or someone's interested in purchasing this motor, you are able to put a crank sensor on there if you want to run it as an OBD2, which I usually don't recommend. I always recommend converting to OBD1, deleting all that, then you don't need anything, and then you can just leave it exactly how it is and drop it in the car. So some people will notice that, some people won't, but that's just what you have to do. If you do have an OBD2 pump, you have to use this cover because the holes will not line up. So just keep that in mind. So there we have it. Cover on, pulley on, not tightened down, just hand tight. So that's pretty much the easy way to put together a B series. Aside from doing all that, the next step would be to do a valve adjustment on this because it does have dual springs, titanium retainers. The cams have been out. It is the same cams that came out of it that we put back in it, but that doesn't mean that whoever did this previously did the correct valve adjustment. So we'll go ahead and do a valve adjustment another day, but I just wanted to get it all together so that way we can get this motor ready to get sold. So again, if you're interested in purchasing this, let me know. It is a rebuilt GSR block, B16 head, dual valve springs, titanium retainers, stock GSR cams, skunk 2 intake manifold, rail, all that good stuff. So obviously new belt because you saw that go on. So if you guys have any questions about any of this stuff, hit me up, let me know. If you need any tips and tricks, or if you do need any parts to put your stuff together, we can take care of you. Talk to you guys later.